People often only see the facade of success, but behind it there is a lot of pain, disappointment, and darkness. The shocking, unfiltered stories of rock stars not neatly packaged. I hope you can face the truth here in this memoir. A cold sweat broke out and a fine tremor continued. His mind struggled to settle down, but an unstoppable rage kept spurring him on relentlessly.
Holden Caulfield does not forgive phonies.
He repeated the same words over and over, staring at the hotel. His breath came in short gasps. His eyes met a maid's returning from a walk with a 5-year-old boy. He approached the child and shook his hand, praising him as a truly beautiful boy. The boy smiled brightly and waved his hand. Watching the boy leave, he gripped the .38 caliber revolver hidden in his coat. 5 shots, enough for retribution. That hypocrite should not exist in this world. Just then, a limousine pulled up to the hotel. The anticipated moment had finally arrived. He slowly brought his finger to the revolver's trigger. March 1966. An interview was published in the American magazine Newsweek. Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right, and I will be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. The interview caused great social outrage. Christian groups in America boycotted their records. People burned their albums, and some radio stations refused to play their songs. The boycott spread beyond America to Mexico, South Africa, and Spain, and they had to hold a press conference to reluctantly apologize. The interview was having a devastating impact on their unprecedented popularity. At the manager's direction, he had concealed his marriage and wasn't even present for his child's birth in order to keep performing. Now, all he had barely managed to build up came crashing down with a single remark. Eventually, the band had to suspend their tour and take a break. Previously aggressive and violent with his wife, he was also negligent of his young son. He briefly considered spending time with his previously neglected wife and child, but ended up pouring most of his time into working on the band's next album with the other members. One day, after becoming infatuated with an avant-garde artist he met at an exhibition, he invited her back to his home while his wife was away and spent the night with her. When his wife returned home, she found the woman wearing her bathrobe having tea with him. But his reaction was nonchalant. All he said to his wife was, "Oh, hi." John Lennon. His childhood was unhappy. His father, Seaman Freddie Lennon, left home and his mother cohabited with another man. When his parents divorced, 5-year-old John was made to decide who he would live with. After that, John lived as a lodger at his aunt's house and spent a lot of time at the orphanage near his home, Strawberry Field. When he was 17, his mother was struck and killed by a police car driven by an intoxicated policeman. The policeman was found not guilty, and John was furious at the world's irrationality. The two things that held special meaning in his difficult life were the Beatles and the number 9. John Lennon was born on October 9th, and the address of the home he lived in as a child in Liverpool was 9 Newcastle Road. The Beatles' first performance was on February 9th. Their manager Brian Epstein first saw them on November 9th. The Ed Sullivan Show that brought them world fame aired on February 9th as well. They signed with EMI Records on May 9th. Just as it took 9 years from when they named themselves the Beatles until they made it big, the most important days in John Lennon's life were all related to the number 9. That's why he intentionally included the number 9 in songs like Revolution 9, One After 909, and Number 9 Dream. After the breakup of the Beatles in 1970, tensions between members continued to worsen. John cut off contact with Paul McCartney and George Harrison, heavily criticizing them in interviews. After divorcing his first wife, remarrying avant-garde artist Yoko Ono, and moving to New York, he didn't see his son for 2 years, and his relationships became increasingly strained. But by chance, John learned of Arthur Janeff's primal scream therapy and realized his childhood traumas were causing problems in his current relationships. John Lennon went to London and LA to receive primal therapy treatment. Primal therapy was a method of overcoming emotional childhood trauma by recreating it. Through primal therapy, John was somewhat able to unleash the emotional infant inside him regarding his traumatic parental relationships in early childhood. 3 years later, when John and Yoko Ono's relationship gradually became estranged, Yoko asked John's personal secretary, May Pang, to sleep with him and suggested they spend some time together. After persuading them, John and May Pang moved to California and cohabitated for 18 months in what they called the Lost Weekend. May Pang tried to mend John Lennon's broken relationships. Thanks to her, he was able to exchange cordial phone calls and occasionally make music again with Paul McCartney. And he was also able to continue seeing his son Julian, who he hadn't seen in 2 years. John made efforts to improve their relationship by spending time with Julian, teaching him guitar. Free from Yoko's constraints, John reopened his emotions and started reconnecting with relatives and friends. After the Lost Weekend ended and he returned to Yoko's side on October 9, 1975, John Lennon's birthday, their second son, Sean Lennon, was born. Wanting to avoid repeating past mistakes, John quit music for 5 years to be a house husband and take care of Sean. December 8, 1980. After 5 years, John Lennon released his new album, Double Fantasy, with great anticipation. John and Yoko returned to their Dakota apartment in New York. On their way to the limousine, people came up asking for autographs. Among them was Mark David Chapman. He silently held out Lennon's album, and John signed it. John asked if that was all he wanted, and Chapman smiled and nodded. A photographer nearby captured the moment. After John and Yoko left, Chapman lingered around the now quiet Dakota building. In the afternoon, he ran into John's son, Sean Lennon, on his way home with the housekeeper. He complimented Sean, saying he was a very beautiful boy. Sean smiled and waved. Late into the night, Mark Chapman read while waiting for John Lennon to return. The Catcher in the Rye, a novel that deeply inspired him. He wished he could become the main character, Holden Caulfield. His anger grew towards the phonies that Holden raged against, and he decided it was time to punish them. A man who brazenly claims he is more popular than Jesus and that he doesn't believe in God. A hypocrite living in luxury while preaching non-possession. That wasn't the real John Lennon. John Lennon, whom he had admired all this time. He even thought that perhaps he himself was the real John Lennon and that he had to get rid of this fake one. He waited for John Lennon late into the night at Dakota apartment. He suddenly remembered when he got the autograph that morning. John Lennon, who had patiently waited just for him, was unexpectedly very polite and kind. But that didn't shake his determination to punish the hypocrite. It couldn't. 10:50 p.m. 5 gunshots rang through the quiet night sky. Then silence again for a moment. The hotel doorman cried out in surprise. When asked what he had done, Chapman said, "I just shot John Lennon." And until the police arrived, he started reading The Catcher in the Rye again. John Lennon was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital's emergency room, and though they tried to revive him for almost 20 minutes, he eventually died at age 40. The time in Liverpool, England, was December 9th. December 14th. Millions around the world observed 10 minutes of silence to remember John Lennon. 30,000 gathered in Liverpool, and 225,000 near New York's Central Park, close to the Dakota building where he was shot. During those 10 minutes, every radio station in New York City went off the air. Despite his lawyer's advice to plead insanity, Chapman admitted guilt for the murder, calling it God's will. In court, he read a passage from The Catcher in the Rye during his opportunity to address the court. He was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison and is currently incarcerated at Greenhaven Correctional Facility after his 12th parole request was denied. John Lennon. As the Beatles' lead vocalist and rhythm guitarist, he came to symbolize 20th century popular music. Not only with the Beatles, but also in his solo career, he delivered socially conscious and political messages to the world, becoming a legendary figure beyond just a musician. However, his violent behavior towards his family and lack of responsibility contradicted the ideals he vocally championed, making one doubt whether he is personally a figure worthy of respect. Does success come solely from innate talent, or does it require personal maturity as well? John Lennon, who lived an inscrutable life. Here in this memoir, we try to unpack his complicated life,